I'd like to thank Four Dimensions Landscape Company for supporting the tour. If you're interested in converting your garden to natives, I always recommend that people work with a company that specializes in designing native plant gardens. And also that you let the designer know that you want a native plant garden. If you would like help designing and installing a native plant garden, you might want to contact Four Dimensions Landscape Company. Four Dimensions is an award-winning landscape design company whose motto is restoring the earth one garden at a time, and whose goal it is to bring people and nature together. Four Dimensions creates well-planned, carefully crafted environments that enrich both human and natural life. You can call on Four Dimensions to design, build, or nurture your garden. You can reach them at fourdimensionslandscape.com or 510-893-1999. We'll go on now to Susan and Bill Teefy's garden in Castro Valley, which was actually designed and installed by Four Dimensions Landscape Company. So inspired by gardens they saw on the garden tour, Susan and Bill decided to save water, create habitat for wildlife, and plant natives. The team at Four Dimensions designed and installed this lovely garden in 2016, and EBMA's lawn conversion rebate program helped pay for the transformation. Woodpeckers, nuthatches, chickadees, and spotted towies have all nested in this garden. Now that the garden's been established, the drip system has been shut off and only plants that need it are watered by hand. So let's go now and meet Susan Teefy. Hi, Susan, how are you? Whoops, you're muted. Can you unmute yourself?
Nope. Susan, we're not able to hear you at all. Is it possible that you haven't plugged in your microphone? Oh, I hear something.
Yeah.
I can hear you. You're great. Awesome.
Yeah, I had this just in case. Sometimes it doesn't work. So can you hear me okay?
Yep, you're good.
Awesome.
Thank you. So Susan, you are a beautiful photographer. Susan took the photos that are in this video. How did you learn to be such a good garden photographer?
You know, I've been taking photographs a lot longer than I've been planting plants. The photography was sort of my into the birds, and then the garden was my way to get the birds to come to me. So it was sort of backwards in a way. But well, yeah, I have been taking photographs since I was a teenager.
Well, it shows. Let's go now and see Susan's garden.
Hi, I'm Susan, and welcome to our mostly California natives garden in Castro Valley. We've been here a little over 30 years, and this yard's gone through some pretty significant changes in that time. Castro Valley is in the Sunset Climate Zone 15, so it's kind of that Goldilocks part of the Bay Area. It doesn't get super cold or super hot. We might get a few days of frost in the winter, and it rarely gets to be 100 degrees in the summer. It is often windy. This property's on a hillside, so when we moved in, we flattened out as much as we could a big area in the middle for a lawn, a big green lawn, and we created a walking path around the outside with narrow planting areas. This retaining wall behind me we put in relatively early, and that worked out really well, especially when the kids were small. We played a lot of games on that lawn, Easter egg hunts and bouncy houses and things like that. But once the kids were grown, we decided to get rid of the lawn and transition to a more bird-friendly yard. I was really impressed and inspired going on the Bringing Back the Natives tour. And we hired the wonderful team at Four Dimensions Landscape to help us do the design and carry out the plan. And for me, the main driver was really attracting birds. That was really the main reason for putting in California natives, at least at first. And we took advantage of East Bay Mud's lawn conversion rebate program. So for about 2.5 years after we installed the new yard, we didn't pay a water bill. So that was really cool. We had one significant native plant that we really wanted to keep, and that was a redwood tree. It was about 6 feet tall when we moved in, and it's probably 40 feet tall now. It's really wonderful. We planted another one in the other side of the yard, and it's around 20 feet tall today. There are quite a few redwoods in the neighborhood. Many of them are really tall. Ours is nowhere near full size, and they're awesome. They have red-shouldered hawks and white-tailed kites nesting in them, and of course crows. So they're just great to have. We've hosted hummingbirds in ours, and we've put up a box for owls. Haven't had any owls yet. We're hoping for those someday. So in addition to the redwood tree, there was another tree that I really wanted to keep, and that was an old apricot tree that had died a few years before, but it hadn't fallen over. A Nuttall's woodpecker had made a cavity and nested in there, and it was really cool to have a spot for cavity nesting birds. So we left it there and we gardened around it. And the next year, Buick's wrens nested in there, and then there were chickadees and titmice, and then it finally fell over on its own. And we've since then put up a few nest boxes around the yard to take its place. So the hillside is a bit of a challenge. We were always fighting the slope when we had the lawn. So now we have 3 sort of different flat areas on different levels, each with its own patio. The upper 2 patios are flagstone and connected by these wonderful stone steps. We have a big table and chairs in the middle under a redwood arbor, and we eat outside here a lot in the summertime. It's really a nice spot. And the upper patio is a little smaller. It has a nice bench and some pots. So there's still a pathway around the outside, but it's a bit closer in, so the planting areas are larger. And we put in a couple of sets of stairs topped with flagstone too, in places where it's really too steep. So it kind of divides the yard into 6 or 7 separate areas. We have an irrigation system. It's a drip irrigation, the brown lines with the built-in emitters, and that's underneath the mulch. And it's operated by a timer, so the yard is divided into 6 different irrigation zones, and each one can be set independently. Honestly, at this point it's turned off pretty much all the time. I find that I just hand water stuff. I water new plants, obviously, and then sometimes certain plants look like they need a little help in the summertime, so I'll just hand water those with a hose, and that seems to be sufficient. The mulch, it really keeps the water in pretty well. The pathways are made of this stabilized, decomposed granite, and these are really porous, which is great. I've seen the rain coming down pretty hard, and it seems to just go right through them. They actually grow moss along the edges, which makes them look even more like a dirt trail through a park. They're pretty neat. And the mulch is mostly wood chips, along with fallen leaves from the deciduous stuff. And the mulch is really helpful in keeping the weeds down, and the ones that do grow are pretty easy to pull out. It keeps the water from running off, and just does a great job of keeping things in check. I try to avoid moving the mulch around too much because there's lots of bugs and larvae living under there. Every now and then I do need to rake it back uphill after it's kind of shifted and slid downhill. It can kind of overwhelm smaller plants, and I need to push it aside. Really, the only problem with the mulch is that the ground-dwelling birds like the towhees and the sparrows kick it onto the path all the time. I could sweep these paths every day and the birds would just kick the mulch right back onto the path. Towhees really have a thing about tidy gardens. They don't really like things to be tidy. It's really important to have fresh moving water, both for the birds and for the insects. We've got this small pond with a little waterfall, and there are lots of birds that come to drink and bathe. This is made out of resin. It's really lightweight. I wanted it to look like a natural rock waterfall, but I thought it was important to be able to completely empty it out on a regular basis and scrub it out and refill it with fresh, clean water to avoid spreading any diseases. And as a bonus, because it's flat on the bottom, these salamanders live underneath it most of the year. pretty much every time I flip it over, there's at least one and sometimes up to 5 little salamanders, and I just move them aside. They're really cute. But the best part about having a fountain is the opportunity to take pictures of birds from the comfort of my kitchen. So I've tied up some bare branches as perching sticks on the fence, and the birds will usually land there for a moment before they come in to the water, and it makes for some great photo opportunities. It doesn't seem to bother them at all, and I can finish my morning coffee and keep taking more bird pictures. So in addition to the birds, the pollinators need water too. The waterfall has a few shallow spots that they seem to really like, especially on warm days. In the summer, there are quite a few bumblebees and other insects hovering over there. You get a lot of different kinds of bees pretty much all year because something's always blooming, even in the winter. And we also get a lot of butterflies and other types of flying insects around the flowers. I'm not really sure what they all are. I understand there are hundreds of kinds of bees in California alone. So I've got a lot to learn about pollinator identification, but they're really neat to watch. In terms of overall garden design, there's several kinds of foundational plants, as I think of them, around the garden, usually in a repeating pattern. These are dependable, solid, fairly dense shrubs that provide the framework or structure for the garden, and then everything else fits in around them. And manzanita is the first one I want to talk about. I've got at least 5 different kinds, but these emerald carpet variety are my favorite. They filled in this area at the front of the retaining wall really nicely, and they're just beautiful. They're fairly dense and not too many weeds grow up through them, and they have these tiny little white flowers that grow really early in the spring. And they also provide really good cover for bluebellies and occasional alligator lizards. The flowers are pretty thick in the early spring. They're white and they grow for maybe a couple of weeks and then they're gone. And then the rest of the year they're just a nice solid green cover. The next one is the coffee berry. This is another evergreen shrub that I just love. I've got 3 of these in various parts of the yard, and they're just wonderful. They're always pretty full, and they just look great all year. They grow berries that start out red and then they turn purple and then almost black, and the birds love them. These ones are about 5 years old, and they've got a lot of little buds on them right now, so I'm looking forward to their berries later in the fall. Another anchor plant I really like is the ribes, the golden currant, and I've got 3 of these too. These are deciduous, but they keep their leaves most of the year. These ribes grow pretty tall, and they grow a lot of these little yellow flowers that are really pretty all along the stalks. They get these kind of long, wispy stems if you let them. I keep the ones near the walkways trimmed back so they don't smack people walking by, but I let the other ones go. They're just really pretty. Their flowers are done usually by March or so around here, and then the rest of the time they're just a nice green backdrop, generally full of some sort of birds. And then there's the Muhlenbergia or deergrass. This has a really cool shape. It's pretty different from everything else in the garden. It starts out really green and then slowly turns a more golden color by the end of the summer. And it grows these crazy spikes that are probably 3 feet tall or so. They're just beautiful. I trim these back nearly to the ground every 2 or 3 years so they don't end up looking like a haystack, but it comes back thicker each time. The ceanothus, the California lilac, is another one of my favorite foundation plants. I've got 3 of these Julia Phelps variety, which are evergreens. And this is a really popular native plant. They're pretty easy to find in most nurseries. I've read that there's more than 60 types of ceanothus in the state. I have probably
4 different kinds in the garden. But for a couple of weeks each spring, pretty early, they're just beautiful with these purple flowers. And they are just a magnet for bees and other pollinators. And once their flowers are gone in the late spring, they stay a nice dark green that makes a nice backdrop for other flowers. And generally the Buick's wrens and other ground-dwelling birds just love to hide in there. I've got this other one called Skylark that's also really pretty. It has a darker purple kind of flower that grows a little later. These ones don't bloom till almost June. And then another foundational plant I really like is the Toyon, Heteromelis. This is a really wonderful local plant that birds just love. I've got 3 of these also, and they're slowly filling in their spots. Right now their branches are still kind of thin, and so when they get full of berries, they droop down, and the birds can't really sit on the branches to eat the berries, so they land on the ground and they fly up and pick them off one by one, which is pretty cool to watch. They're pretty entertaining. And these ones are about 5 years old right now. And then there's the flowers. I love California poppies. I mean, who doesn't? They're just spectacular. There's nothing that compares to that bright orange when the sun hits them. They're just glorious. And they reseed themselves every year. I usually end up pulling some of them out because they take over the path and they can kind of overwhelm some of the smaller plants. But they're just wonderful. California poppies were kind of my gateway drug into the world of California native flowers. They're just so beautiful. I had no idea there were so many really beautiful flowers. And now I'm not really sure whether the birds or the flowers are my favorite part of the garden. There's so many and such a wide variety. I've been trying to keep track of which ones grow in which parts of the yard, which ones bloom early, which ones bloom later, and trying to spread those out. And then figuring out, which ones need to be replanted every year, so they're basically annuals, and which ones are perennials and get pulled back. These epilobium are my favorite, and they're also one of the favorites of the local hummingbirds. Some of them, like this Santa Barbara daisy, are perennials. I chop this back pretty significantly every winter, and it just comes back stronger every year and blooms a ton. A couple different kinds of buckwheats. Flannel bush is just really, really beautiful flowers a lot of the year. They grow a really long time. They bloom a really long season. And these Gambelia are really wonderful too. They're not super local. I think they come from the Channel Islands, but they grow these tubular shaped flowers that are very popular with the hummingbirds. I have probably 6 or 7 of these scattered about the yard, and they stay green actually most of the year as well. A few different kind of annuals I've learned to plant every year. I just buy those usually in 4-inch pots and stick them in and around other things. And then I have a number of heucheras. These are really neat plants, even when they're not blooming, but when they are blooming, they have these stalks that stick up and make these really neat either pink or white flowers. They stay for probably 2 to 3 months. They make a pretty nice show of flowers throughout the yard, and then like I said, the rest of the time they're kind of a low mound of greenery that looks great the rest of the time. I have a couple different kinds of irises, from a kind of a light purple to a dark purple. And they get pretty thick, so I have to dig them up and split them periodically and move them around, but they do pretty well under the redwood trees in particular and along the edges of the pathways. And I'm playing around with these Louisia. This is something that's a little bit newer for me. There's so many different kinds, and I've been sticking them in the retaining wall, and they seem to really like it. There are a lot of colors available. And these monkey flowers also come in a wide variety of colors. I have, at this point, probably 10 or 12 of them. And I think these white ones are my favorite. They just bloom. They start maybe in February early March, and they bloom all the way through maybe August or so. Just a ton of flowers. These, the more rust-colored ones are pretty thick bush, and we've had spotted towhees nesting underneath there. And there's another one called jelly bean, which is pretty cute. All different kinds. I have some of them in pots as well. They do really, really well around this area. The penstemon are just lovely as well. Those are perennials. I trim them back each year, and they come back every spring, and they're just beautiful. These tall stalks of purple flowers. Phacelia is another one that just has this glowing blue, really pretty flower. That's an annual. And then I've got another ribes, the red currant, grows these long stalks. And then salvia. They smell so good, and they have kind of these weird looking flowers that are different shades of purple. They often get a little bigger than I think they're going to get, but they're great. And then the blue-eyed grass reseeds itself, which is really nice. I have a little carpet of that. And then last, the verbena. These are just lovely. They're easy to grow, readily available, and they grow. I want to say they bloom from maybe like February all the way through September, October. Lots of pollinators really like them a lot. And then every yard needs a little whimsy. We don't have any actual rabbits, but I've acquired a collection of a little rabbit statuary. They're super cute. And a few statuary birds as well.
So that's it. Thanks for watching. Hope you liked it. And go out and plant some native plants. Thanks.
Well, Susan, that was fantastic. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Well, we had a number of questions, and let's try to get to some in the next few minutes. So certainly there were a lot of compliments on the beautiful photographs and the video and the music. Someone asked from YouTube, how tall does your coffee berry grow?
I don't know. Ultimately, right now they're about 5 years old, and the tallest one is probably 4 feet tall. So not terribly tall. They're relatively slow growing.
So your garden is just 5 years old?
2016, yeah.
That's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. Some things grow really fast.
Yeah.
The deergrass was the one that got me. I would say within a year, that stuff was 4 feet tall. It's awesome.
Well, it's really beautiful. It doesn't take so long for a garden to just be spectacular and look so full.
Yeah, I kind of overdid it, I think, with some of them.
Some of the
You buy little 4-inch pots, and then they turn into 4 foot tall. Salvias, especially, they have a tendency to just get really big, but they're cool.
So someone asked, how often do you clean your fountain?
I'd say probably at least once a week. And I just hose it down, and I have a little scrub brush, and I scrub it out, and then I fill it back up. I think I wanted to try to make sure that I don't have mosquitoes growing in there. And I think the life cycle of a mosquito is about a week or so.
Yeah.
And I just didn't want to put anything. I'm just kind of scared to put anything in there that might affect the birds or pollinators. So I just dump it out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's see. Someone asked, what type of soil do you have?
I should probably know that. It drains pretty well. It doesn't seem sandy or clayey. So I'm not sure.
Okay. So someone asked, was the yard planted all at the same time, and did 4 Dimensions design all of it?
It did. There were, and so I would say of the stuff that's in there now, probably 75% of it is stuff that we picked together with Four Dimensions. Some of it, like anything else, some of it didn't do well initially. That winter, I want to say 2017 it was really rainy that winter, and there were some things that just got waterlogged, whatever, they just didn't do well. So I replanted some things. And then we had a couple of other things, either for one reason or another, just didn't do well. So I've made some different selections, but the sort of the core of it, the shrubs, the sort of more permanent plants are original, well, from 2016 from Four Dimensions.
Okay, and somebody asked about the hardscape. Did Four Dimensions do the hardscape and the veranda structure as well as installing the irrigation?
They did the hardscape and the patios and the pathways and the irrigation. We did the arbor.
Okay. All right. And let's see if we have, Stephanie, do you have one last question that we should?
Just maybe a quick one on the mulch. Somebody was wondering if you have to replace it regularly.
I haven't had to yet, but it does, because it's such a hill, it does move around. So I tend to, I'll rake it around a little bit, but I haven't needed to supplement it. It seems like I will have to eventually, because it does, it becomes part of the soil. But at least for the 5 years that I've had it, I haven't had to add any more.
Okay. Well, Susan, I don't know if you have the time, but if you'd like to stick around on Zoom and answer some of the questions that we didn't get to, I'm sure people will be happy. And I want to say thank you so much for offering your garden. It was beautiful. You did a beautiful job on your video. Your daughter,
my daughter helped a lot. Yeah.
Well, you were a great team.
She's great. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, thank you so much.